Dumela, which is hello for an individual, and Dumela Lang, which is for everybody else, for men and women. That's the plural. But thanks for coming. Hopefully you'll enjoy this. Basically, it's going to be a talk of wildlife management, some of the history of it, and not only in this country, but also in Sub-Saharan Africa. So with that, we've kind of divided up North America into areas of models. And one of the models that they're using is one that was developed by three individuals, Val Geis, Sean Mahoney, and John Organ. And they basically put together a thesis on the North American model. What they tried to do is break out what was going on in North America. And they coined the time period from 1600 to 1849 as a time of abundance. And basically, the Europeans thought that this was the land of Eden. We had abundant forests, wildlife, fisheries, very few humans. However, the tools of the hunters were pretty much limited at that point in time. The next era that they described was the era of exploitation, which was 1850 to 1899. And population increased. There was more demand for market hunting, and the technology for advancement also improved. These are a couple of the advancements that they had of the technology. These are punt guns on the left-hand side of the screen. Basically, they were mounted on a boat, and they try to find a raft of ducks. And what they do is they shoot the ducks and then try to pick up as many as they possibly could. So yeah, also had things being used for, so there's something else going on there, but I don't know what it is. But anyhow, the wildlife declined in the east, the hunters moved west. And there were new resources and harvest techniques. Advancements in transportation produced the potential, let's say the railroad. Increased hunting pressure by market hunters led to the conflict between hunters that valued a fair chase, self-restraint, and skills. Believe it or not, a lot of the big cities in the Northeast receive a lot of wildlife in the restaurants in New York, Boston, Washington, and so on. Basically, the Supreme Court ruled in 1842 that wildlife resources could be held in trust by the government to benefit past and present future generations. And the era of protection was about 1900 to 1929. Again, this was described by Geis and Sean and John Organ. Humans invaded most of the wild areas. Humans dramatically altered the landscape, and wildlife populations declined drastically, which led to this individual, very influential, Theodore Roosevelt, probably one of my favorite presidents. He was there to try to protect wildlife and land. He really did understand habitat, which was a lot of people during that day and age didn't really have a lot of good understanding about that. And George Bird Grinnell, the Audubon Society, regulation and enforcement should be funded by hunters. And he was also the editor and contributor to Forest and Stream, which was a natural history magazine. Boone Crockett was put together by Roosevelt and Grinnell in 1887. It was a coalition of sportsmen and conservationists concerned with the issues that affected hunting, wildlife, and habitat. Still exists today. And the Lacey Act was the first federal wildlife law. It prohibits the interstate transport of game killed or possessed in violation of state law. So if someone did something in state that was illegal and then went to another state, they could be convicted under the Lacey Act. And it was a start to control market hunting. This is an old a drawing on the page here from Arkansas, which shows the passenger pigeons, these huge flocks that used to blot out the sun. They were so large. And unfortunately, there are no passenger pigeons left. And the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918, and it was federal control over hunting migratory game birds. Protected most migratory game and non-game in North America. It was ratified in 1918, even though it had passed in 1916. So this model that we had in the beginning of the 19th century basically differed from all the European and Asian models. Two basic tenets: fish and wildlife protected for non-commercial use of individual hunters and anglers. And the second is fish and wildlife are to be managed in such a way that their populations will be sustained at optimum levels forever. The 7 foundation components in this model, again, this is the model developed by John Organ and Sean Mahoney and Val Geis. And basically, they call it the 7 sisters. And again, you have to realize it's a model. So models mostly are things that are in progress, they're works in progress. But wildlife is a public trust, elimination of markets for game, allocation of wildlife by law, and wildlife should only be killed for legitimate purposes, no frivolous use. And wildlife are considered an international resource. And science is the proper tool to guide wildlife policy and management. And also the democracy of hunting, which is quite interesting because everybody has the opportunity to hunt if they choose to do so. And then the era of game management, which was about 1930 to about 1965. And it gave birth to the science of wildlife management and conservation. Aldo Leopold published the first game management. That's his book that he wrote in 1933. The Cooperative Research Program began in 1937. And that research program is, you can find these research units using most of the land-grant colleges across the United States. And they've done some significant work throughout the country. The Wildlife Society, which is my professional society, was established in 1937. And Aldo Leopold, he's a co-founder of the Wilderness Society, the 1930 American Game Policy. Again, his book, Game Management, in 1933. He was chair of game management at the University of Wisconsin. And he also published the Sand County Almanac in 1949. And if you've never read the Sand County Almanac, you really should. It's quite a book. It's a little slow and sometimes a little hard to read, but it's well worthwhile. He has a lot of good thoughts that he's put down on paper, and a lot of good reflections as well. Important legislation, we had the Duck Stamp Act in 34, and that requires waterfowl hunters to purchase federal duck stamps every year. And Pittman-Robertson Federal Aid, Wildlife Restoration Act, which was a federal excise tax of 11% on arms and ammunition. And monies were redistributed to the states for wildlife programs. Talk a little bit about that more in detail a little bit later. We had the era of environmental management, which is about 1966 to present. Growing environmental awareness. Remember, Earth Day was 1970. Focus on habitat. Aldo Leopold's land ethic, which is simply enlarges the boundaries of the community to include soil, waters, plants, and animals with a collective, the land. So he wrote that, and it's part of the things that you can find in the Sand County Almanac. Establishing of game laws and wildlife management areas. And again, the Endangered Species Act is in 1973. We also had Silent Spring, which was published by Rachel Carson. We have a lot of different citizens organizations who lobby and litigate. We have the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts, EISs, Environmental Impact Statements, and Public Review, Forest and Bureau of Land Management, Action Plans, and Wildlife Recreation are true partners. So basically what we had here from this federal aid that we discussed earlier, which was in 1937, is a user pay, user benefits. So put excise taxes of 11%, as I said, on firearms, ammunition, and archery equipment. It's apportioned to the states by the license sales and their needs. And it also mandates that hunting licensing be dedicated to wildlife conservation. Now, a couple of things you should realize, user pays, user benefits. Now, this was not all, unicorns and rainbows. A lot of people thought it was a great idea, but there were other people who said, no, who wants to be taxed? I don't want to be taxed. So it was a little bit of a slog to get it through, but it did. The other thing that's kind of on the up, that's really important to realize too, by mandating those license fees dedicated to wildlife conservation, many times in the past, state agencies or state government, I should say, what they've been doing is they say, hey, we have a slug of money in license sales. Why don't we tap into that to help out our budget? And they've tried that a number of times, and they've lost each and every time to do that. So that's something that's really quite good for the protection of the license fees. To bring it home a little bit to the bald eagle in New York State, we just had, when I started in 1976, we only had 2 nesting pairs in the state of New York, and neither nesting pairs could produce viable chicks, primarily because of DDT. They established the Eagle Hacking Program, and that's one of the things that you have to realize too, that it was federal aid that basically supported that program, and a lot of other programs, that helped save wildlife. Audubon Society, National Wildlife Federation, they're all actors in this, but basically the money to get that done was through federal aid. So basically what they did is they established a goal when they started of about 40 nesting pairs. And the last data that I saw, it may be updated for that, was in 2014. We had 258 nesting pairs in New York, and about 225 chicks produced each year. Now, moving on to Sub-Saharan Africa, which is quite different. My wife was a Fulbright scholar, and she went over to the Botswana to study at the, or do a research study on HIV/AIDS at the university, which is in Gaborone, Botswana. So we went to Botswana, which you can see is north of South Africa. We also did some trips into Zambia, Zimbabwe, Namibia, and all the way up to Rwanda. So it was a lot of fun. Did learn that culturally, Africa is quite different from New York, and different from the United States and different from New York. Being a New Yorker, we're kind of like, we want things done yesterday. That's not the case in Africa. Basically, if my spouse wanted to have a meeting, she had to not only email the people, but to text them the day before and the day of the meeting. Otherwise, they'd be no-shows. So it was very loose as far as timetables were concerned. This was the University of Botswana. It has about 16,000 students in it. Beautiful, beautiful campus. You can see another shot of it. This is the main building where the administrators are. And this is their sports center. And they have a lovely pool, which you definitely need if you're going to go to Botswana. It was 114 degrees on Christmas Day. So basically what happened is the Magna Carta, they established the rights of the nobles, and wildlife became property of the crown. So what we have to be thinking about is what happened to Africa. Well, Africa in the 16th century on was overrun by colonial powers: France, Britain, Portugal, Spain, Germany, and Belgium. And what did they do? They brought, the Europeans brought religion, they brought resources within these colonies were theirs to exploit. It was basically me being the colonial power. I'm coming in, I'm taking whatever minerals, whatever ivory, fur, whatever need could be extracted or exploited, they would take. They also brought laws and infrastructure and bureaucratic institutions. And that's one of the things that we found that when we were there, even though Botswana was really not a colony, it was a protectorate by the British. But ensconced in the bureaucracy of Botswana is a very strong influence of Britain and being bureaucrats. Everything has stamps. You can't get anything done without a certain number of stamps. Again, it can be hurry up and wait for a lot of things. And basically, the other thing that they brought with them was that wildlife was owned by the landowner, which again, if we go back to that North American model, that's not our model. So models of wildlife management in Africa, you have different models on different places. I'll discuss that a little bit in detail. You have no sport hunting on government land. You can have hunting on private land, and you can have hunting on government land and private land. Again, it depends upon the country that you're in. Recently, the fourth president of Botswana, Ian Khama, his father was the one that started Botswana. He was the first president of Botswana. His son became the fourth president. What he decided to do was, in his country, was to eliminate all sport hunting. No hunting at all within Botswana. What he wanted to do was to have tourism, basically have tourists come in to do the wildlife viewing. And probably they did quite well with that. They made a lot of money. He was ousted from government about 2 years ago. And since that time, the current president has opened up the area to sport hunting, particularly elephant hunting. And he was interviewed back in March, and reflecting upon that, his nose has been pretty much out of shape because of they've reinstituted hunting. They've been boycotted by various European countries and the United States because of that. So their tourism is down. Probably going to get a lot worse with the coronavirus. But you can, even in Botswana, you could have hunting on private lands. I'll go to discuss that a little bit as we move on. Have a game reserve, believe it or not, right in the capital of Gaborone. And what's interesting to note is that my spouse would ask the students if they've ever been to that game reserve, and most of the students have not. And it's really quite fascinating. It's a neat preserve. It's mostly antelope, different types of antelope. Like this is an Impala, and they have elands and kudu's and ostriches and things like that. However, doesn't seem like the folks are really that interested in observing wildlife, which is unfortunate because it's quite quite a resource for them. If you go to the big places, which is the Okavango, which is like the hot spot in Botswana, you'll have mostly rich Europeans and Americans that do this particular traveling. And I mentioned to some people about have you ever been up to Okavango? And no, and because it's too expensive. Petrol's too expensive, so they don't want to go up there. There's another spot. There's an ostrich that we caught, not caught, but I took a picture of it in the Gaborone Game Reserve. This is Africa's raccoon. This is a Vervet Monkey, and usually once a week they will come into the compound and try to get into your house because basically there's no screens on any of the windows. So, but there are things that they call burglar bars, which are pieces of metal that are welded to the outside of the window, and they're big enough that these guys can fit in there. And this is just a little something that's kind of neat. This fella here, turned my back. Next thing I know, snuck into the house, grabbed an avocado, and then ate it right in front of me as I was watching it from the window. But they would go through the trash, be laying in bed early in the morning. reading down on the roof.
Mike, your audio keeps going out.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know why
No,
that.
it's okay.
I just think the clips audio just overrode it for a second.
Oh, okay. Maybe that's it. Yeah, we went to South Africa to the Midikwe Game Preserve and spent some time there. This is the first time I was up close to a lion that roared, and we were probably about 10 feet away from him. He was sleeping most of the time. He did wake up enough to give us a roar, which is quite impressive if you're that close to the animal. One of the elephants on this game reserve, they probably have about 600 more elephants on this game reserve than they need. However, in South Africa, you're not allowed to shoot elephants. So what you can do is you can move them to other game reserves, but mostly everybody has a lot of elephants. There's some cheetahs that we saw. These were 3 brothers. And this is a pack of wild dogs. These are probably the most efficient predators in Africa. And what I'll do is I'll move this one to here. And they had just killed a kudu. And it's kind of interesting when I put this on, what you'll see is all the pups flock to this one female. And what she'll do is they'll be grabbing at her throat and her muzzle. And what she'll do is she'll regurgitate food, and they'll be eating that on the ground. So we can take a look at that. So my audio may go out, so.
Hot dogs.
There's a leopard that we spotted one morning, and what was kind of neat about this particular one was he had just killed an impala the night before, and he drug it up to the tree, basically to keep it away from the hyenas and the dogs and lions. So he was quite content, just resting and pulling out his having enough to eat. We went to Rwanda to track mountain gorillas, and if you look at this slide here, it was kind of interesting. Is that this is the preserve right here, and you can see that the people are farming right up to the edge of the preserve. So populations, even though they were really hit hard a number of years ago when they had the massacre, and 1 million people were killed in 100 days. The people there are thinking about what these resources are there, and they're really taking care of them now. But you're getting a population increase, and they're really pushing it to the limit, trying to get into the reserve. It's quite beautiful, and it seemed like the people that we met there, just about everyone was impacted in one way or another by the massacre, by the terrible. It was quite an emotional drain. We did get to see one of the sites where we had 240,000 people buried in mass graves and remains. This is a large silverback. We were there. This was about 2015, right around December, and this was the oldest silverback male, and they have about 12 different troops that have been habituated to people, that they'll take you in, that you can go visit them. But so we went in, this group that he was the head of had about 19 individuals, and we saw about 17 of them. And I'll probably go out again, but this was kind of interesting. What you'll see here is a female and some young babies, and as it ends, you'll see the silverback, who's about 450 pounds. Will be moving in from right to left on your screen.
Right. Guys, I deserve this at the last minute. Please count me, please. I wish everybody come. He did the alpha. Again, he's now relaxed and really comfortable.
He's about 42 then. So if he's still living, he'd be 47, which I think is quite old for him. This is wingman. We were guided by two individuals. Plus, there are rangers that travel with these groups within, keep them within sight to prevent poaching. There's my spouse and I. That's how close you can get to them. These are some of the young people that we saw in Rwanda waving to us as we drove away. The Namibia Desert, which is in Namibia, and really it's very neat. We did get to see quite a goodly number of wildlife while we were there. But within each one of these dunes, these sand dunes, they're loaded with all sorts of minerals as well as sand. China would like to come in and mine the sand to take out valuable materials that they could use in their computer industries and I guess phone industries that they're developing. It's one, if anybody's really interested, there's a book out by, I think, Richard French, which is called Africa, China's New Continent. And basically it describes how China is getting a foothold in a lot of different African nations so that they can exploit their resources. It's fascinating. And when we were there in Gaborone, much of the building that was being done in the city itself was being done by the Chinese government. This is not Taiwan, it's the Chinese government. This is, I think, a 7-scaled lizard that our guide found for us. And here's a gecko. And again, when you look at this land, it's amazing. But he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew where to find these animals, and basically, he just go and find them. How the hell he did it, but he did. We had this one here. This is at the Kama Rhino Preserve. And again, this is going back to Ian Kama. What he did is he put this facility in. It's a huge facility. I think they started with 10 white rhinos. This is a black rhino. And I think they had 6 black rhinos. And the black rhino is very aggressive. Now they have at this preserve, in this reserve here, they have about, I think well over 40 white rhinos and I think 16 black rhinos. This guy was leaving to go to, I think he was headed to Zaire. Because that's what Kama had been doing, has been trapping these elephants in Botswana, keeping them in a safe place, and then moving them to other countries that wanted to repopulate their areas. But again, this guy was quite the one that was quite aggressive. So they were kind of pleased to see him leave. This is the Thetakudu bush camp, which means that's the name of an anteater. And we went there primarily just to check it out. It's a lovely place. Although we didn't have four-wheel drive, we did make it in. There was it had all these signs that said, "Well, you're 5 kilometers out," and then it'd say, "Well, you're only 4 kilometers out." Then the other sign would say, "Well, you're almost there." And finally, we got in, and it was very interesting. At this place, because they were farmers, and they also had basically antelopes. On occasion, they would get leopards that would climb the fence and get into their reserve. And on occasion, a lion would get in. But when we were there, we only saw pictures of a leopard that was in the place. But you could, if you wanted to, you could go hunting here at this camp for antelope if you so chose to do so. We didn't. It was we just had a very nice time. We had great meals there. It was really quite good. So Hanzi in Botswana is home to about 30% of the population of Hanzi is San, or the Bushmen. And so we did see many Bushmen when we were there. And actually, what they did is they had arts and crafts there for us to look at and purchase. And what we did is we back in March we went to the Okavango Delta. This is we took a single engine plane. So my spouse, our daughter, our younger daughter, my sister and her daughter, her older daughter, came and we went on a safari. And what it is, the Okavango is the largest inland delta in the world. And what it does is it just takes all this water, and then during the wet season it is quite wet, and then it goes down into the soil. So there's tremendous aquifer underneath it. And water resources are going to be something that's going to be very important in Africa in this day and age. What we did too is we tried to do something, and thinking about it right now, we probably should have thought better of it. Because what we did is, this is called a moray, Mokuru canoes. And basically what they'll do is they'll pull, and they'll take you through the wetland here. And believe it or not, as we're going through some of these channels here, you could hear hippos on one side of you, and you could see crocodiles. And we're thinking about it now, was that really a bright thing to do? But anyhow, we made it. And it was really quite something to see, that people were quite good, our guides there. Although it was hotter than Hades that day that we were there. You see some of the, so like right beyond that, might be some hippos. And hippos are probably one of the most dangerous animal in Africa. And we had elephants. In Botswana, they probably have more elephants than any place else. Probably have between 60 and 70,000 elephants. The other thing that the Kama did was he established an anti-poaching team, and basically it hit poachers hard and heavy in Botswana. And he made an announcement, I guess, to all the neighboring states that if you come to poach into Botswana, please bring the address of your mother so we can send her your body. They were not fooling around. These guys are quite heavily armed. What's happened in the interim, remember I mentioned that they opened up hunting of elephants. What's happened in the interim, the current president disarmed the anti-poaching group. So that's another thing that set him off. So what we'll do is we'll take a picture of this. Some elephants. Oh, okay. Maybe we won't see that one. Okay. This is a dead elephant. Basically no tusk that was found in the Okavango. Again, poaching is a problem. You know, the other thing is too is that people are trying to, they're subsistence farmers, and I think within the past year, 12 farmers were killed by elephants. So it's quite a tough thing. You know, you have interactions with elephants, and usually you're going to be on the short end of the stick with that. Some zebras and Cape buffalo, which are, if you want to keep your distance. When we were in Rwanda, it was kind of surprising. We're up in the mountain, and we're hiking back down, and all of a sudden we looked over, and there was a Cape buffalo looking at us. And they don't suffer fools lightly. So fortunately, he didn't do anything, but they can be very scary. Here's some rhinos. This is a white rhino and a calf. It's an interesting looking bird. It's called a hammerkoof, which looks like a hammerhead. This was at the Okavango Rhino Preserve. We stayed there, and we were having breakfast, and we came to visit. Fortunately, there's a glass partition between us. Was a puff adder. So we were glad that he was on the other side and we were on this side. These are one of the snakes that probably cause the most bites because they're so well camouflaged that people generally step on them. And they're usually not too happy about that. This is the safari group that we stayed with, mostly, which mostly means it's a type of acacia tree. But these are our guides. This is Shama, LT, who stands for Lion Tracker, and this is Corleos. And they were just super guys. They really were. They took us everywhere. They could do anything. They would put up the tents. They cook the food. We had a bad tire. Those guys patched the tire. Did really well. And I would recommend that group if you ever decide to go on a safari. I think that may be a few years off with the virus, but they were really an excellent organization. And here's our older daughter is taking the picture. Our younger daughter, I should say. This is my sister, my spouse, and Caitlin, my niece. And as you can see, we had wine. We had a 3-course meal. It was quite something. And warthogs, believe it or not, I've had warthog a number of times. I think it's my favorite meat that I had when I was in. It looks like it would be terrible to eat, but it's delicious. It really is. This is what they call a leopard tortoise that we found. And guinea hens, which are also very tasty. And this is a hyrax, which is, believe it or not, related to an elephant. I wonder if they've done the DNA on it. I don't know. I think it has to do with something with bone structure, but I'm not sure. And while we were there, we were invited to 3 separate weddings, which was kind of neat. We had a very lovely time at each one of them. And at this wedding that we went to, I met this was the retired principal of the village that we stayed at. You can take a look at the windows there. Those are the burglar bars I was telling you about. This was on a compound. She was the head of housekeeping, very lovely lady, and her husband was a sergeant in the Botswana Army. This is another wedding that we went to. This was a little bit more upscale, but again, we had lovely times there. And some pictures of giraffes. This is a pride of lions. This is quite fascinating too, because we came right in on them, and there's a bunch of females and a lot of cubs. And the cubs would just basically go from one female to another and nurse. And it was quite cute to see. I think this one this one we can see. And in the truck.
Surrounded. Surrounded.
Yeah.
This is really cool. We're almost in our car. Hello, nice to meet you. It's like hair before the
Okay, that's it for me. You get a nice slide of zebras and a rainbow. So, again, open to questions. Be happy to speak to anybody.
Hey, Mike, this is Don. How long were you in Africa, and what was the main reason again? To do with your wife's job?
Yep, she had a Fulbright, and basically we were there for 9 months, a little bit over 9 months, and her job was to do a study on HIV and AIDS. Basically, what they wanted to see if their paradigms that they've been using for testing are correct. So basically, she's put that together. It's in press right now, along with 2 other of her colleagues over in Botswana. So hopefully that'll be coming out pretty soon. It's just hard to to get things published in this day and age. So.
What was your living quarters situation? Obviously, these were, side trips to the preserves and game preserves. What were your living quarters?
We stayed in a place called Innisfree Apartments. Basically, it was a very small place, but they had a pool, which was great. But we just got to the point where we just didn't want to be there any longer. As it turns out, there's a fellow by the name of Mike Main, I'm sorry, and his wife Cheston. Mike is very well known in Botswana. He's been taking people out into the field for years. And what he's done is he's written a number of books on the culture of Botswana. And believe it or not, one of the first days that we were there, we were walking by Innisfree, and right next door was this plaque that said, Mike Main and Cheston. So I said, that's got to be the same guy, it has to be. So what it is, I rang the bell, and then they let me in, and I said, is this Mike Main the author? And she said, yes. I said, I love his books, because when we left, some people gave us books, and 2 of them were from Mike. And basically just opened up to us, and we found out that he had redone a flat right next to his place. And that's what we did. We stayed at a flat, which was really lovely. Again, it was hotter than blazes because no AC and no screens. So flies were like unbelievable,
Mm-hmm.
But basically you were in a compound. Most of the places that had compounds. You had razor wire on the top of your compound that was walled or all walled. Some people had electrical fencing on top as well. As far as safety is concerned, we never had any really bad encounters. As far as what can happen is usually petty thievery. But people come in and try to steal something. But Johannesburg, on the other hand, that's a different situation. It really is. Johannesburg, there are places where the police won't even go. It's that tough. There are some neighborhoods, but we really had no problems whatsoever. We just had a fun time. It was a lovely little flat that we had, and we had a bedroom, bath, and shower, and we had like a common area, which is basically a kitchen, a living room area, and a dining area. All in one. But it was lovely. It really was.
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
Mike, this is Darwin. For the wildlife professionals that you might have interacted with, what kind of background did they have in terms of higher degrees for studying wildlife management and populations and animals?
Yeah, it varied. They do have their own, became a university. It was a ag school and wildlife, natural resources college. I gave a paper there. And basically, the fellow that I had, he had gotten his master's from that institution. But basically, he was a teacher, and also he worked for the wildlife agency. Another fellow that I met, which was BirdLife Botswana, he got his PhD from Oxford and in wildlife. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to put a environmental ed center up in the Chobe, the River Chobe, up in that area. But he was a heck of a nice guy and quite knowledgeable.
Mike, this is Richard. Did you have one trip, or was this a number of trips and small excursions?
Yeah, we basically, our home base was going to be in Gaborone, in the capital. But as I mentioned in the beginning, it's like hurry up and wait. What they call the festive season starts like in the beginning of December and may go into the middle of January. And basically that means everybody leaves Gaborone and they go to, their villages. So if you want to have a meeting, well, you're having a meeting with yourself because nobody's there. So that's why we did a lot of these side trips, just to see, when will we ever be back in basically in Africa? I don't know, but we just had to take advantage of what we could do. The standard of living for us, I think we made money when we were there because everything was very reasonable. It really was. I mean, our rent was about, for our flat was maybe about $200 a month. It's cheap, and food was relatively expensive. The only thing that was expensive was not really, but it was expensive for people was alcohol, wine, beer, and the reason for that was once again the president Ian Khama, his sister I think died of being an alcoholic, so he was like death on alcohol. So what he did is he put these huge taxes, huge in quotes. It really wasn't that bad, but I guess people were really upset that he was doing that. But I got to tell you, if you would go out, usually not on weekends, primarily because Friday and Saturday nights, we get up and maybe we go shopping in the morning, and invariably we see car wrecks, And in Botswana, the rule of thumb is if you get pulled over for DWI, if you can stand up, you're not drunk. So, and I'm telling you, there was a ton of accidents. I've never really seen that many accidents. It's amazing.
Hello, Mike. Thank you very much for this presentation. I wonder, which month were you there?
Oh, we went there. We started in, at the end of August, and we finished up probably the start of May. So it was the end of August in 2015, and then in May of 2016. So,
Thank you.
So to follow up on that question, if you were going on a single trip, when would you go?
I think you're probably best off to go during March. That'd probably be the best, because it's getting pretty dry, and the animals are going to be kind of, if you go to the Okavango, they're going to be kind of clustered at the different watering holes, so you have better opportunity to see them. But excuse me, I think the big deal is you have to go with the right guides. That's the key. Because we've had people that when we were looking at the mountain gorillas, these two young women went with us. They were part of our group, and they had been to Uganda to see the mountain gorillas, and she said the guides were just awful. They just didn't seem like they knew where they were going to find the gorillas. But our guides were really good. And the thing I noticed about gorillas that you could smell them before you could see them. So it was pretty impressive. Well, you get 17 gorillas. It's pretty intense. So any additional questions?
I will unmute some people who are on the phone just in case they can't do it.
Hey, Mike, this is Don. You mentioned Theodore Roosevelt. I was wondering if you'd had the opportunity to read the book about him called The River of Doubt.
No, I have not. I have not read that one. I've read all of Morris's books on the three volumes on him, and Paul Grundle, I Rose Like a Rocket. That's another good one on Roosevelt, but I haven't.
I forgot the author's name. She was very good, and it's about that period of time where there were, he had already been president
Right.
for 2 terms, and then there was another president there, and he ran against Coolidge and forget the other one. But anyway, he lost. And so this was to take his mind off of that defeat. And he went with his son to South Africa to find this river, South America. And it was quite a story.
Yeah,
quite
yeah.
a story. Yeah.
Yeah, he ran against, it was Wilson and Taft.
Wilson and Taft, there you go.
Yeah, Doris Kearns, a good one, has another good one out on him, but I have to read The River of Doubt. I have to do that. Because like I said, I always admired him, and primarily what he's done for natural resources. And hopefully we can forget about some of the things that are going on right now. But it's another story, and probably another Zoom. So Wendy, are we gonna call it a day, or?
Yeah, any last questions? If not, thank you very much, Mike.
Okay.
I will
Great job, Mike.
Yeah, I will work on putting this on your YouTube channel for the friends.
Oh, great.
Tremendous.
Yeah, fantastic.
Wonderful.
Kela Labota, which means thank you. And such.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mike. Take care. Good to see you.
Okay.